Okay, so I'm going to begin because it's a longish paper and quite a lot of slides to get through as well. Um, so I think I can sit, right? Otherwise, I'm higher than you, which is not proper. I mean, a guru should be higher, like you should be higher than the pupil. All right, so this paper is called Gods, Devatas, and Post-Colonial Philosophy of Religion. I'm going to try and explain why I have post-colonial philosophy of religion here, and yet I go back 3000 BCE for the origins of Indian religions. So the trope underrepresented, as in the theme of this conference for me, stands for the subaltern. It's a post-colonial term. This is why I call it post-colonial philosophy of religion, subaltern. As I explained in the much-cited article, what is the subaltern of philosophy of religion? I think everybody knows that article, both in Sophia and in the book Post-Colonial Philosophy of Religion, which set off some groups like the Global Critical Philosophy of Religion and has an influence in changing the direction of philosophy of religion, along with the works that Sophia is doing. The counterfactual is both the comparative philosophy of religion and the conventional philosophy of religion, where, for those who have taught philosophy of religion, we begin with the question of the existence of God. The great Indian Smart, in his groundbreaking book, Doctrine and Argument in Indian Philosophy, argued that modern philosophy of religion rests rather on two dogmas: a single focus on problems of natural or philosophical theology, enacted in propositional analysis in the context mostly of Western monotheism, and more significantly, its neglect of the totality of worldviews, ranging over a wide compass of doctrines, myths, and symbolic patterns, sacred practices, gods, and ultimate concerns. Smart's three-tiered prolegomena, structured around comparative analysis, the history of thought, and the phenomenology of a range of experiences, plus normative principles and actions, converge into what I call the post-colonial philosophy of religion. So that's the origin of post-colonial philosophy. To illustrate Smart's claim, consider that in a number of traditions, anthropologically oriented comparative religion theology proponents used to call lower or minor traditions as distinct from higher or major traditions. The same kinds of concerns of conventional philosophy of religion, nor for that matter of comparative philosophy of religion as practiced in the early to mid 20th century, are present. So these concerns are not present in some of these traditions. That effectively would leave out much of humanity and history also. So if you use some philosophy of religion place like Notre Dame, for example, half the population of the world is left out because their concerns are not addressed. So in the interest of returning to these marginalized traditions, a significant topoi and place in the global critical philosophies of religion that I'm centrally involved in, we go back to redraw the map, bring to prominence what conference organizers have called underrepresented religious traditions. But more so, I would like to underscore the intellectual underpinnings of the same. Okay, the intellectual underpinnings. Do they have anything important to say to philosophy of religion? In other words, as we revisit history of God or gods from the vantage point of post-colonial lens, part of the critique phrased into disquiet with the Hegelian style historicism in evolutionary theology, or what has also been called theogony in the 19th century, which in part has been responsible for projecting the desirability of the arrival of monotheism among Indian people. And that evolutionary theogony was the subject of an article that came out in Sophia last year in the special issue that Ricardo put together. This is a sequel to that paper. But it's been a long time coming, the idea of monotheism in India. But perhaps it never arrived quite in the form it was embraced after Zarathustra brought a version of it in the form of Ahura Mazda versus Angra Mainyu to Asia Minor, first impacting Judaism, then Christianity, later Islam, arguably also Sikhism. But as monotheism is not something that I'm going to go through, but I want to show towards the end where it might have come from. Apropos, in philosophy of religion, it is a standard thing to begin with the question, does God exist? And if so, what is God's nature? Only recently have people paused to wonder exactly what conception of God are we dealing with. It seems to be so Abrahamic, in other words, Judeo-Christian Islamic, laden, Abrahamic laden, but would seem utterly out of place in, say, a native or Aboriginal religion where the serpent spirit is the highest kind of being they have in their spirituality. And that too couched in mythological legends. Same goes for theodicy of the problem of evil and suffering. How could an omni-old God, good God, allow evil in the world? Again, there is an uncanny premise about the existence of omni-God, omni-good God, that is sneaked into the supposed counterfactual. Both theodicies have been designed to end up defending the same old concept of God because the truth of the conclusion was already presupposed in the premise. You can't have a good God, there can't be evil. But the concept of the kind of being argued for or against, and the argument itself, are disingenuous and fraught. Did such God exist in the minds of South Asians from the very beginning, or in their religious beliefs and practices, their theodicies, or their philosophies, etc.? That ought to be the first question. If it turns out that at the end of the day, Indian history and philosophy of religion did not have, or perhaps even needed, the concept of God, then we can't even be talking about underrepresented God. Right? Then we should call a spade a shovel. So that's why my question is. So we go to the first slide. So within the broad sweep of the Indian tradition, one such subaltern space, I claim, belongs to the precursors of the Aryan. And by Aryan, I mean Indo-Iranian, not Indo-European tradition, namely the Indus Valley civilization or culture. It is of hoary past, no doubt, but not without its significance and some telling messages for our present quest. There will, in passing, be a slight divergence to Plotinus and also to the Maori, or effectively Polynesian religion, in the section on panentheism or pantheism. First, though, a bit of a prehistory of the subcontinent and some terminological clarifications. So the oldest people, so we can't turn this light off because you can't see too well. The oldest people who came during the Eolithic and Paleolithic stage of human civilization to the subcontinent were Negroids. And I'm sorry to be using that term. I'm not using it in the sense of the end term that forbidden in, say, the Americas. But with the oid, it's okay. Negroids from Africa and Australoids and Austric peoples, probably from Western Asia and Far East. They could be called Mongoloids later on. These conquests of the Asian people appear to have brought primitive form of language and culture into India. For people were still food gatherers and not food growers. Basically, Vedoid. So Vedoid, it looks like Veda, but it's not. V-E-D-D-I or V-E-D-D-O-I-D. Right? This Vedoid strain, the first one, settled first in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, and migrated northwards. They believed in a path leading the death to paradise, guarded by an avenging demon. Sometimes these groups are lumped into Nishada, or pre-Dravidian people, who presumably spoke a language belonging to the Austroasiatic or Austronesian family, the parent family of Munda language. They were more easily integrated into a later phase, slide 2, thanks. This is slide 2. In a later phase into Dravidian culture, that but retain some of their distinct practices, like clothing and so forth. Andaman Island still has full-blooded Negroids. Austro-Australoids are also there in the wilds of the Malay archipelago. The boomerang and the blowgun, third. Blowgun, two among the most primitive weapons, are still used by Australian Aborigines. And so they're the Australian Aborigines, and they're the Dravidians of South Indians, and people have drawn similarities linguistic as well, not just archaeological or the shape of the skull and so forth. And this image could well be in India, in the Aboriginal tribes of India. The fourth one, and that's the boomerang, which supposedly originated in Australia, but actually is used in India as well, and the global too. So you can see the Australoid people and Austronesians, in other words, people who are Indonesian today and so forth, they're still there in some of the islands like Sumatra and so on. And they're tracing either in this direction or they came from India and then came back to India. There's a lot of work being done in these areas, but it's really very interesting. Among ostriches outside India, as evident in Maori and Polynesians across the Pacific, you have the idea of mana, or the divine essence, which permeates individual objects, beings, and the whole universe. There is also a curious overlap or analog of the Indian theory of Srishti, world emergence, with that of the Maori Polynesian ostrich, which describes the evolution of the material world from the unformed primeval basis of darkness and non-existence, which appears in the Rig Veda, Sat, Asat. In the beginning was neither being nor non-being, and you have that in the Aboriginal people, in the ostrich people, the Polynesian. Also to note, there is a conception of the universe as a gigantic egg, Brahman Anda, as well as the notion of the higher spirit incarnating, the idea of avatar, in animal bodies. Fish, tortoise, boar, and so forth. The avatars take those animal forms. And the use of lunar almanac. Yeah, so they were using lunar almanac. So this is the first full moon today, by the way, of the lunar year. Right? Many Maori and Australian Aboriginal words are very similar or almost the same. It is more than plausible that the ostrich destiny of the soul upon death of the body inspired the conception of transmigration, to which moral and philosophical content such as karma was provided by the Jains and refined by the Buddhists, were added later in Hinduism. Start with karma. Much like the mana Brahman, or the supreme spirit in the Upanishads, is both transcendent and immanent. There is a word called kata ubul in Tamil used, that which is beyond and also within. This is almost an early form of pantheism, if not panenpsychism, a term that I invented. Panenpsychism, you might say, that goes far back. Brahma Sutra's Brahman, of course, also has reverberation in Plotinus' idea. I'm thinking the next slide. Plotinus will come again later. Okay, so we're still continuing with some of the slides of the Aboriginal people, and then the next one. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's the didgeridoo that they play. This kind of dance still happens in Torah, some of the hill tribes of India. Focus on relationship between people and nature, between powerful spirits created the land and its people's job to take care of. Next slide. We'll come back. We'll come to Plotinus in a minute. Okay, so it's a little bit more of this sort of, you wouldn't be able to tell which people are where, because they all look almost sort of similar and alike. So you have indigenous people, asteroids, and so on, way before the Rama and Krishna and so forth, across the entire Asian region, going all the way to Asia Minor. For no other reason, for some reason that it's called Asia Minor, and that all that's part of Asia. Okay, part B. And now we can go to slide 5, I think. No, 6, sorry, 6 and 7. I think we can go to 7 now. So, Arco Parpola is a European scholar. His well-known book called The Roots of Hinduism, Early Aryans in the Indus Civilization, has made the argument that the likely original source for the fundamental elements of Hinduism might well be in the Indus civilization. So we go to the next slide. Okay, so that's part 1. The corollary is that the Dravidian-speaking people spread from Iran to India. They probably evolved from the Vedic, as I said earlier on, Vedoid or Vedic stock of people. Or some claim they came from the Mediterranean, long before the Aryans and the Semites got there. others that they came from Iran, or at least via Iran, as Scythian, I think the word is Scythian Iranians, to be found to this day in the rural parts of Gujarat and Maharashtra. Its Sumerian affinity has often been emphasized by archaeologists, suggesting that the Dravidians may have themselves come from this Asia Minor region. Archaeological findings date the Indian Indus Valley culture, slide 8, from around 3,300 to 2000 BCE. They boasted a very advanced form of writing in Brahmi script, but it has remained undeciphered. It is believed that their speech was not Sanskrit but a form of Dravidian lingua, with close resemblances in South Indian languages represented by Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada. The Dravidians appear to have been known to the Aryans at first by two names, Dasa and Dasyu. In Iran, these names changed into Daha and Dahayu. So Indus Valley culture, slide 9, is traced back to the representative cities in Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Lothal, spanning a huge territory stretching from present-day Pakistan. So, sorry, go to 10. Yeah, so stretching a huge territory stretching from present-day Pakistan, Larkana district of Sindh, Punjab through to Gujarat. This full-fledged civilization flourished in Indian soil, based mainly around a thickly populated urban culture, slide 11, and economic discipline, sustained by surplus agricultural production. A centralized authority that managed social arrangements and its living provisions, such as flat-roofed houses, civic baths, sanitation, granary, irrigation, and viaducts delivering water. Elements of this civilization have been noticed at various places between the Himalayas and the Arabian Sea, mainly along the Sindhu and the former Ganga system, but not in the Ganga-Yamuna plain. So it's not in the Gangetic plains at all. These people were engaged in craftsmaking, like pottery, utensils, jewelry from precious stones, thriving commerce and trade, and their entrepreneurship likely extended via land and sea routes to Persia, Iran, southern Mesopotamia, and perhaps Egypt also. You'll hear tomorrow from Maria Lucia about some of the connections with Egypt and yoga, possibly as well. In any case, the civilization lasted some 2,000 years and then declined in stature. So, can you go back to 10, please? 2,000 years and then declined, due possibly to climate change, whence the source rivers dried up and the land became inarable. There are suggestions also that the ferocious attacks led by the semi-nomadic Aryans, or Proto-Aryans, as we call them, to distinguish them from Indo-European Aryans, may have destroyed at least Harappa civilization. Before we get to the Aryans, I'll dwell on the religions of the Indus people a little more. So we're back to 11 and then at 12. The Indus people seem to be nature worshippers, the great mother or nature goddess, as the unearthed seals appear to suggest. Definite images of mother goddess, but also a Phallic-like emblem of a male god resembling Shiva in the subsequent Vedic pantheon. So I don't know that I have Shiva there, but I might have. But I have this thing that I really like. If you move around, the images change in this. You go from one god to another god. And so I carry some. So these are kind of the figurines that you have. So the next one, the next slide, 13, has the face of a sort of authentic thing that becomes almost like a Shiva form. The presence of fertility cult among these people is also represented by figurines of pregnant women, and women with children. Some terracotta figurines may be votive offerings and others may be toys. The most common figurine is that of a female wearing a loincloth with or without girdle, much jewelry, and a curious fan-shaped headdress with, let me go back to 12th slide, yeah. With two cup-like objects about the region of the ears. It's that, but it's not very, very clear. But this is also a very, very important figurine. So you can see some of the scripts, so hieroglyphic, like Egyptian hieroglyphic, but they're not been deciphered. Those seated on three-legged chairs or with flowered headdress may be effigies of women in devotional attitude. So we see that they have sort of a devotional attitude. So we go to 13 now. The male divinities are characterized by a fawn headdress, which symbolize, and then number 14, symbolize supernatural powers. So we've got the fawn headdress going on there. A very important scene depicts a god sitting on a raised throne in a typical attitude of yoga. That's that one there. You'll hear more tomorrow. The god is three-faced, wears a pair of horns in the form of a trident meeting in the tall, fan-shaped headdress, and is bedecked with much jewelry. It seems to be in the Urdhva Medra Penis erectus form. On the cumulative evidence of three faces, yogic postures, strident head-shaped dress, and the four animals around him, Sir John Marshall suggested that the figure represented a prototype of historic Shiva in his Pashupati or likeness aspect. He is the counterpart of Gilgamesh, the Mesopotamian hero. A very interesting scene depicts a god seated in a yogic posture on a low throne, and on either side of him is a kneeling suppliant canopied by snake's foot. This anticipates the Naga, the snake figures of later Indian mythology. Among the uniconic objects of worship are the ling, the phalluses, and yonis, vaginas, together with the bialytic form. I don't have the image here. The yonis, or the vaginas, were pierced with a cylindrical hole in the center and were either round or had a wavy outline. Miniatures, mostly of wavy pattern, have been found in stone, 50. Shell, an imitation carnelian. Another sacred symbol, whether it was an object of worship or had only a talismanic value, was a simple cross form of swastika. So the next one, sorry.
This is 15. This is 15.
On with 14. And then 15.
Yeah, because if you look
oh, okay.
This is
the next one, yeah, I forgot to change the number. So yeah, there's the swastika there. And that's a dancing woman, but could also be could also be a nature goddess. That's good. So you said the severe drought there, okay, that's the decline. The core language is likely to have been. So summing up this section, the religion of the Indian people consisted in worshipping the mother goddess, the deification of trees and their spirits, certain animal chimeras, and therianthropic figures, the prototype of Shiva, an uniconic faith symbol, the swastika, and so forth. Of course, the cult of the mother goddess and the swastika symbol were common throughout the ancient world. It bears a close resemblance to the second pre-Diluvian culture of Elam and Mesopotamia, and certain Sumerian practices, like burial ceremonies and artifacts there too. It's surprising that in Athens, they have a swastika as well. In the Harappa culture, the worship of the mother goddess, phallic emblems of Shiva, and of certain animal forms was common. So that's something that's established, which later on comes into Hinduism. They were largely matriarchally inclined, and their religious practices appear to presage later Hindu practices of puja. Apart from yoga, puja also, or a form of flower offering or spearing paste. But iconic worship was conspicuous by its absence, as were veneration of cow, or much less the use of horses in sacrifice. However, remnants of the culture of nature worship plus mother, like unto earth, as a major spirit protector survival, were passed to the revivalist traditions in post-Vedic India. So in tandem, there was the rite of puja, which is now characteristic Hindu ritual of worship, and also in Jain and to some extent Buddhism as well, and most common one. This was a non-Aryan and in all likelihood the original Dravidian ritual. The word puja and the ritual it denotes are both peculiar to India. They are not found among the kinsmen of the Indian Aryans outside India. The nature of puja is as follows. The whole universe is filled with the spirit of divinity. So it's like a pantheistic, right, or panentheistic. By a magical rite, the supreme spirit is invoked into some special object or an image. So, we can go back to the previous images as well. a pitcher, a pot, a pebble, or a piece of stone, or even a branch of a tree. When this ritual known as the prana prasista is performed, the image or the object becomes a sort of abode of divinity, like the icons of Jesus in Eastern Orthodox traditions, or indigenous Catholic traditions here. Temporarily or permanently, the image or symbol is then treated like or as if it were an honored guest, a god himself. That's it. Water, flowers, and leaves of certain plants, fruits, and grain, and cooked food are also offered to this object. It is sought to be regaled with music and dancing and other things of state dancing, which pertains to the royal personage. So the state could be involved in this as well as patronizing. The individual worshipper can also come into a sort of very deep personal spiritual relationship with the divinity through this symbol. In fact, in the deeper aspect of religion, this Dravidian or non-Aryan ritual of puja conduces to a more intimate kinship with the divine and can then be postulated through the Aryan Homa. So we go to the Aryan Homa. The Homa ritual is basically one of a give and take. The next slide. Okay, so this is the coming of the Aryan. So we'll go for Homa in a minute. In the puja, we have an ardent spirit of abandon through devotion, which is absent in Homa. Homa meaning sacrifice, the fire sacrifice. In later Hinduism, so maybe you can see the next slide. I'm not quite sure. Not yet, not yet. So we stay back, stay back. So the long and short, there's a whole etymology of how puja comes about through certain words that resemble it. So puja is a very, very peculiar, very specific practice of the more the Dravidic tradition, but now of course it's pan-Hindu. So in the Bhagavad Gita, we have this following verse. I want the Sanskrit, I've just gone. Whoever with the devotion offers me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, that I accept the devout gift of the pure-minded. So this is an appropriation of a practice that was common among Dravidians into the Aryan tradition. Right? And now, devotionalism, bhakti, it got incorporated into bhakti devotion. This verse is of tremendous significance in the history of the religion, as it gave the charter, the official imprimatur, so to say, to an unveiling, non-Aryan ritual, when Hindu society was being given its permanent shape by the mixed Aryan and non-Aryan thought leaders in the Madhya Desha or the Upper Ganges plains. Now I'm going to talk about the arrival of Aryans. So the Dravidian sense of the myth found its expression both in the ritual of worship and the discipline of yoga as a path for union with divinity, as well as in the desire to keep in constant touch with the dead by means of ceremonial on which is based the later Hindu practice of Shraddha. In other words, the transmigration should happen. Whoa, hardly halfway through the paper. The Sanskrit word Nagara, town, has often is Dravidian. So now, slide 17. This is the arrival of the Aryans. So maybe what I could do is I could just summarize the paper and then maybe walk you through the slides. That might be better. You read the paper later on. Anyway, it will come out. So the Aryan period is actually about later, about 1500 BCE. By that time, it seems that the Dravidian civilization had already declined, or the Aryans were responsible in its demise. So the Aryans seem to have come from, as Papolayan people have argued, the steppes of Eurasia or Central Asia. Next slide. Palmies to oxes, which is it's not. This is the line shouldn't be there. Amu Darya River, west border of Afghanistan and Turkestan, Uzbekistan, where they had settled and grown the Indo-Aryan or the Aryana, from which the word Aryan, Iran comes, by the way, Iran comes from, Iraq also comes from the same word. The different variations of Proto-Indo-European and Indo-Iranian languages learned by Hittite, no time to talk about this, the oldest form of Sanskrit and Avesta, the language in Iran, were brought by them into India. So I can show through the next slide, here you have the idea of the gods, the polyphony of the daily iconographed deities. And so there are these 300, initially there were only about 16, 13 gods, three, and then 13, and then 330, and then increased to 3,300, 3,330 gods. Just kept multiplying. That's why I call it polyphony. How can one person personify elements and nature's forces? No wonder Orientals like Max Muller and Oldenburg call the Vedic text insane babblings of primal religious instincts, just a lot of magical hubris. And and people like Asizena and people have argued that this is sort of the beginning of a very primitive form of theism, which then had to grow into polytheism because they couldn't stop multiplying their gods. Not all the gods were brought by the Aryans, some had developed locally. So the main gods were brought, Indra, Varuna, and so on. These were the gods that the Aryans had brought in, and then other gods evolved from there. So I think I can go into so the Vedic period, as I said, goes back to about the 14th or 15th century BCE in India and in Iran and northern Mesopotamia, to a time when the pre-Vedic Aryan or Indo-Iranian language was covered. Okay, and then maybe the next slide I can go on. So that's the Homer. That is something that the Aryans brought, obviously. The idea of offering into fire. And fire, Agni, is the conduit. It's the Hermes that takes the offerings to the heavens or to the other gods. This practice is continued to this day. Meanwhile, the Brahmanas, defended by the Mimamsa, argued that you shouldn't have iconic representations of gods at all. They are actually uniconic. They are effervescent. I call them effervescent monthly gods. In other words, they arise only at the point where offering is taken to the fire. They take the food and then they disappear, effervescent. They don't have actually ontological existence outside of the process of ritual. That's why Homer has to be performed. You can't have gods hanging around. So for every purpose that you want to perform a sacrifice, there has to be a god for that, right? So you want cows, you try and find a god that will provide you with cows. Okay, the next slide. So I can read to sort of summarize. The Vedas, for all intents and purposes, provide the impetus and framework for development of the more important ideas and doctrines of Hinduism. Rigved, which came with the Aryans, literally means praise. And you have that in the Iranian tradition as well, especially in Zarathustra or Askenism. And the gods like Agni, Vayu, Surya, Sun, and so forth, you have identical gods in Iranian language, but also in the Greek tradition as well, Zeus, and so on. And I was going to make some parallels with Plotinus as the one, but we don't have the time here. But what I can say that in some of the Upanishads in the Brahma Sutra, you have a very similar thing going on. Brahman, the world coming out of that, the world soul, individual soul, and so forth. So, when people talk about sort of Mesopotamia and so on, and, when Plotinus, as Proclus and Porphyry tells us, took material from all over the place, the Mediterranean, Egyptian, Philo had brought back texts with Alexander the Great and so on. So it seems as if they were either aware of the traditions that were going on in India and so on, or that there were parallel seeds had already been around. They just plucked them and made philosophies that converge almost converge. They're not, of course, identical, of course. And Plotinus, as everybody knows, was about vegetarian and so on, and an ascetic. And wanted to get to India, but only got as far as Iran. Why was that attraction? Why were they so drawn to India? It's quite amazing. Even Aristotle was drawn to Indian texts. Borrowed Jain material for sure. Next slide, yeah. So that's the Homa, the sacrifices. And then you can see in the sacrifices, the gods will come and take the sacrifice and deliver whatever goods they are to deliver. This is, of course, very Aryan. It's not Dravidian. Dravidians did not have this kind of practice. But the argument that I'm making is that there was a convergence. There was a kind of a confluence of Dravidian nature gods, nature worship, puja, and so on, plus the objects that they use, much broader, jewelry and so forth, which the Aryans were not using. They were using grains and they were using fruits and water and fire, of course. But other things were brought in to embellish the kind of ritual sacrifice that they had. The next one. I know I'm running out of time. So the Upanishad to the medieval Kashmir Saivism, to the Almas in the Tamil Nadu, right on to Ramanuja, bear semblances to panentheism and pantheism that develops post-Brahmanas. The Brahmana comes after the Rig Veda, and informed by theisms in the Puranas and the Bhagavata tradition across the spectrum, on the way to henotheism. So maybe in the discussion I'll explain what henotheism means, the term coined by Schelling and then used by Max Muller, which, one God can become superior, another God can become superior another day. It's like, Trump replacing Biden, Trump being replaced by Vance, and so forth. The office is there, but it's filled by different ontological characters. Next slide, yeah. So where does this, this sort of what Hegel called polymorphic, perfidiously voluptuous, perverse deities of Brahmanism come from? Is again the amalgamation of Dravidian female fertility symbols with male phallic symbols, which became very strong, which of course, the Aryans being a patriarchal society, a patriarchy, their deities were mostly male. Even Gayatri was not, we have images of Gayatri as a female, and I don't think I have Gayatri, but she was not. It's just the name of a beta in the there were no female deities other than maybe water, Ganga, and so forth. But that's gender, that's not sex. No, it's linguistic gender, linguistic. Okay, so the next one, there are no icons in the paper. And then from that, you grow the Trinity, the Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, Shiva. This, people call it the Trinity, but there's another Trinity that I want to talk about in a moment. Of course, the Creator, the Preserver, and the Destroyer. Okay, the next one. And you, of course, also have half male and half female. So, you have male deities, female deities, bring them together, merge them into one. And so you could have half and half of the nourishment. Right? And here's my idea of the Trinity that you have in the Hindu tradition. Father, Son, Spirit Holy. I will not be blasphemous and say, we were talking yesterday at the church. I won't call it Holy Spirit, I'll say Spirit Holy. And Notre Dame didn't give me the fellowship for prayer and providence, because Spirit Holy, that's blasphemous. But let's develop this, right? A good idea, Father, Son, and the Spirit Holy. I think it's a resemblance. I don't think there's any borrowing and so forth, but it's amazing that these ideas emerge in different parts of the world, the ideas of future. Okay, a couple more slides and then we'll be done. Next one, yeah. And so, the Puranic gods develop into many, many different forms. Again, you have half and half, and Shiva, Durga, worshipped widely in Bengal, places like that. Okay, the next one. And then there's the phallic linga with the yoni, the vagina, on which is sitting. So popular, widely used in India. But again, the Dravidic element is very, very strong. You have the serpent as well, the phallic symbol, the vagina, and so on. Okay? So there's Shiva Parvati. And you have them in the iconic, in the iconic form. As well. So that's not iconic. And you can see it's very beautiful. You move this around and the gods change. And that's exactly what effervescent mantric effect means from the Mimamsa position. So the panentheistic sleeper, impossibility, leaves it to Brahman to do the job that Plato's demiurge did. Again, Why would you need a demiurge? All traditions seem to have had one. Somebody who creates, either the serpent spirit or uh, Brahma or the demiurge in Plato's case, the world soul or the world soul in Plotinus' case. All right, the next slide. Yeah. And then we get to my page. And so they get more weird, they get wilder and wilder as tradition goes on. Here you have Kali, with sword and so forth, that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa worshipped and worshipped in tantric traditions, yogic traditions, even to the point that she cuts her head and with the blood heals and kills the demons and so on. Okay, next slide. Here you have Shiva. Um, um, what is it? Mohini is Vishnu, born as damsel to lure Shiva away from the supreme. Yes, so Vishnu is born as a damsel to lure away Shiva. Sort of the gender bending of divinities is quite prolific. Okay, next slide. Here the 10 avatars, the incarnations, but the important part is that you have the animal forms first, which are the remaining, and then you have the semi-human, and then the human forms that come along, and that ends with a Kalki, the half horse, half man. It's the one in the Revelations also, but it's the reverse of the Revelation. It's half horse and half man. Okay, the next one. And then you have non-human figurine deities as well. So this is Puri, right? Yeah. It's Krishna and Balarama is his brother and brother. Brother?
Their sister. Their sister's brother.
Ah, his brother. Okay. All right. And they're all connected with Vishnu. It's amazing how you get back to almost uniconic forms, or certainly sort of human, but in a separate representation. Okay, the next one. And you have, of course, the monkey god too. So Hanuman, hugely important. In the diaspora, you have temples with the epic gods. You have all of them. The modern ones: Rama, Sita, Lakshman, Krishna, Radha, Rukmini, Durga, Shiva, Vishnu, Lakshmi, Hanuman, all of them on the same dais, in the same worship platform. This is in Preston, Lancashire. Okay, next one. Problematic gender identity. This one is hermaphrodite, half hermaphrodite. Greek hermaphrodite gods as well. This is the second century populist Devi that came out and became very famous in 20th century. Not 20th century, sorry, not second century, 20th century. Santoshima. Next one, last slide. Here you have from Goa to Paraíba. This is just yesterday. Maria Lucia took me to this Virgin Mary temple. So from Goa to Paraíba, from Jampasara, Virgin Mary is worshipped as goddess of the hills, Devi Parvati Radhagiri. And this is in Goa. And you can see look at the symbol. Sorry, that one is in Goa, that one is Goa. This is the Zompashar. Yes. But she's worshipped as a Devi, as a goddess in Goa. Not as just Virgin Mary Immaculate, but actually worshipped, not just venerated. Okay, the next one. And then the mother goddess even appears as India, Bharat Mata. India as goddess. That's a very famous painting by Abhinandan Tagore, who's a nephew of Rabindranath Tagore. India represented as the mother itself. And you have Gandhi, who said, truth only is God, but the Indians made him into a god. Not only Indians, some Indians, much more. It's actually the person who thought Gandhi was a prophet was Martin Luther King Jr., not in India. Next. Finally, the Semitic style personalist monotheism has arrived over there in Ayodhya. Ayodhya is a city in UP? No, UP? The 20th, 21st century Indian warrior god, political, I put in parentheses, Ram or Rama. Mueller, Hegel, Zena, Vidhi Sarkar, we won't go into who that Vidhi Sarkar was, have accomplished their avenge against all forms of theism, non-theism, atheism, Babel theism, polypantheism, panpsychism, and non-dualism of the Buddha, Gaudapada, Bhartrahari, the Jains, I should add Mahavir, Abhinav Gupta, Shankara, Hemachandra, Sufis, Bowls, Aurobindo, Parsi, Gnostic, Shaktas, Tantric, and so on, and converted into one monolithic, monotheistic political drama. And so he's arrived. So you can see it's almost like this sort of de-Aryanization, right, of and de-Dravidianization and a Semiticization. I'm not using it as in anti-Semitic sense, but it's the idea of a one God, monotheism. You know, I'm the God, I am who I am. There's no other God beside me. And why Hinduism had to go for that is that it cuts out the Babel. You know, it makes things easier. It simplifies things. You know, it just have one God, one truth, one nation, one leader, right? And then you want to make problem. And one community, no minorities, just a majoritarian community. It makes things much simpler. So there is a tie between majoritarianism and monotheism in the Indian context, possibly also in the American context. That's why the evangelist is so powerful. So how did we get here? How do we get from Dravidian tradition, Aryan tradition, to this tradition? And if I can just read out the last paragraph. So then we came to Rig Veda. So I said we started with the Mesopotamian, possibly Asian, Dravidians, and so forth, or they may have come from the Australoid places, but they were Vedoids, for no doubt about that at all. They were not Aryans. Then we came to Rig Veda. That is hitherto regarded as a fountainhead of everything Indian, the repository of the essence of Indian culture, the source of philosophical ideas and religious beliefs, of cultural life, the code of conduct, and so forth. With the discovery of proto-historic civilization in the Indus Valley 36 years ago, the pendulum has swung the other way. The discovery has affected the antiquity and prestige of the Rig Veda. Not only much of what is found in the religious practices as also in the material culture of India is now traced to the proto-historic people of the Indus Valley, but the Vedic Aryans have been associated with the destruction of the civilization of the Indus Valley civilization, and possibly, I think, the Indo-Europeans, not the Indo-Iranians, who are probably the force behind monotheism in India. I leave you with that thought. Thank you.